Since I've started KyngPin Creations, I've drawn a lot of human things. Between Dungeons & Dragons, genre swaps, this is that, everything's looked human. And I want to expand my art style a little bit, so today I'm going to be drawing aliens. One sentient and one monstrous. Things that can look humanoid but with much more exaggerated proportions. And to tie it all together, I've written an original story that's going to be portrayed by an original character that I've created. A collector of artifacts that goes by the name Ivan a Clue. And without further ado, let's get into Dr. Jeck and the H.A.R.M virus. Let's get started. Across all the known and unknown universe, there are many civilizations with their own customs, advancements in technology, and in some cases even their own flow of time. But there is one thing that never changes between any of these civilizations: war. The first artifact we'll be looking at today is a dried tentacle from a sentient virus that could alter the physique of its host and make them into a... well, to understand that, you need to know the whole story. For generations, the planet Gremmor had been thrown into chaos due to civil war between the Greks and the Grens, two subspecies of the overall Gremmorian race. After so many years, many of the Gremmorians on both sides of the conflict forgot what they were fighting for, although documents suggest it may have been related to political shenanigans and general tomfoolery. Neither side was about to forfeit their cause, even if they didn't know explicitly what their cause was. Dr. Jeck was a brilliant scientist on the Grek side of the conflict. Then, yes, growing up, many young Gremmorians called him Jeck the Grek. During the war, the Doctor worked to develop technology to aid the Greko army. One of his best inventions was an auto-artillery tank that could fire hundreds of shells in seconds. His final project assigned to him by Greko General Styler was to create some kind of ingestible substance, whether it be a pill, elixir, or smoothie, that could accelerate the healing process of any wounded Greko soldiers. Styler not only wanted to lessen the death toll from soldiers who succumbed to their wounds, but also get the wounded soldiers back into the fight quicker. Loyal to the long-forgotten cause of the Greks, Dr. Jeck worked countless sleepless nights studying Gremmorian biology and the subtle difference between Grek and Gren biology to create an accelerant that would heal Greks but also deteriorate the health of Grens should it fall into the wrong hands. After weeks of experimentation, Dr. Jeck was one step away from the first prototype of his Health Accelerated Recovery Mixture, or H.A.R.M, which, depending on your viewpoint, could either be considered the smartest or the stupidest name to give something like this. Dr. Jeck pulled on his goggles and prepared himself. This was the moment of truth. Either all the research he's done would culminate in exactly what General Styler wanted, or it would fall flat and nothing would happen. Of course, there was also a third option, that something completely unexpected would happen instead, which, in this case, it did. When he flipped the switch, the electric coils blasted the test sample with lightning. Then all was still. Not that Dr. Jeck expected any movement. It was, after all, just a drink essentially. Still, he slowly approached the final product, when one of the coils released some leftover charge with a loud crack. The Doctor jumped at the noise and turned to look at the coil, making sure it was safe to continue forward. But when he turned back to the jar containing the H.A.R.M, it was empty. Test tubes clinked against each other on a table. Dr. Jeck whipped his head towards the source of the noise, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Similar noises began to circle him one after another. He was no longer alone in his lab. Someone, or something, was nearby. With nothing else nearby, he swooped up the H.A.R.M jar, hoping whatever was in his lab was small enough to fit inside. He waited until the source of the noises stopped moving, and slowly approached it. On the table, he saw a small creature with a bunch of tentacles just rummaging around the table. Dr. Jeck tried to slam the jar on top of it, but the creature turned and noticed him, and pounced directly towards his face. The creature wrapped itself around the Doctor's face with two tentacles, while it tried to dig two other tentacles into his eyes. Fortunately for him, Dr. Jeck was still wearing his test goggles. He ripped off the goggles with the creature attached to them and threw them to the ground. He took the jar and dove at the creature. slamming the jar on top of it. He grabbed the lid and sealed up the jar, hoping it would hold whatever that thing was. Somewhat stupidly, he brought the jar close to his face to inspect it. The creature was covered in tentacles that it wrapped around itself when it wasn't using them to move. It had a single red eye that poked out from behind the tentacles. The creature was currently using a couple of tentacles to hold itself up, and another one to tap rhythmically on the glass. H.A.R.M. The doctor was dumbfounded, or as he preferred to call it, temporarily demoted to average intelligence. He had created intelligent life. Okay, not intelligent life, but definitely sentient life. The creature was volatile to be sure, but also knew how to communicate with him. Dr. Jeck spent the following night studying the living H.A.R.M, while still promising General Styler that the recovery serum was going as planned. Unfortunately, he was unable to find out anything about H.A.R.M while it was still in the jar. He yearned to test what would happen if the creature had successfully burrowed into his head, but, of course, he wasn't stupid enough to just blindly test it on himself. He had put in a request with Styler to bring in subjects to test H.A.R.M on, and with Styler still believing Dr. Jeck was making an ingestible serum, he agreed. Dr. Jeck just had to wait for the subjects to arrive. However, that night, while Dr. Jeck was continuing his surface-level research of the H.A.R.M creature, the door to his lab was blown off its hinges. Before he could comprehend what was going on, the doctor was surrounded by dozens of enemy Grenian soldiers. They cleared off the tables, smashing all of his beakers and test tubes, and burning some of his paper files. 2 soldiers took hold of the doctor and threw him into the corner of the room, along with the H.A.R.M still in its jar. They hit him with the butt end of their guns repeatedly, and demanded to know what the thing in the jar was. Dr. Jeck told them he didn't know what it was, which was technically true, but they didn't want the truth. Each answer the doctor gave was met with another blow from a gun, all while H.A.R.M was continually throwing itself against the walls of the jar. Then, H.A.R.M stopped. Instead, it began tapping on the jar with one tentacle, the same code that it had used to first communicate with Dr. Jeck. He was telling the doctor what to do. He didn't want to do it. He had no idea what would happen if he and H.A.R.M merged together, but if he didn't take the chance, he was going to die. The Grenian soldiers wouldn't accept the fact that he didn't know what H.A.R.M would do to either Greks or Grens. He had to choose. Find out what H.A.R.M did, or find out if there was an afterlife. Dr. Jeck took the jar and with his remaining strength threw it on the ground, smashing the glass and releasing H.A.R.M for the first time. I think now would be a good time for a break. I'm going to run to the kitchen and shall return shortly. Would anyone like some tea? Now, where were we? Ah yes. H.A.R.M extended all of its tentacles to propel itself quickly up Dr. Jeck's body and onto his face. As it had tried to do before, the creature burrowed its tentacles into Dr. Jeck's eyes and underneath his skin. The doctor could feel himself growing. His muscles were tearing, repairing themselves at an Gremmorian rate. They were building on themselves over and over. Dr. Jeck's sheer size was multiplying until he towered over the enemy soldiers, then the lab equipment. He kept growing and growing until his back touched the roof of his lab. His body was expanding like a liquid trying to fill its container. Finally, this mass was too much and the roof began to crack and crumble as he continued growing past the limits of the lab walls. As soon as H.A.R.M attached itself to Dr. Jeck, the Grenian soldiers pointed their weapons at the transforming doctor and began firing at him. But it was too late. Each bullet that pierced Dr. Jeck's organs were rendered useless as he immediately began healing himself around the bullets. He was healing rapidly. He was invulnerable. He was the H.A.R.M beast. The growing beast let out a terrifying roar. It raised its claw hand and in one swipe completely destroyed Dr. Jeck's lab and the Grenian soldiers inside. All the gunshots and the beast roars and the crumbling infrastructure had alerted the Greko forces, and some were on the location, staring in awe at the H.A.R.M beast. Not knowing anything that was happening, they had no choice but to treat the monster as a threat, which was a good call. There was very little of Dr. Jekyll's mind left in the beast, just pure animalistic instinct. General Styler ordered every auto-artillery tank on the scene to unload everything into the monster at once. The bullets pierced through the beast's skin, but didn't weaken it in the slightest. All their best weaponry was useless. They had to try something else. Now, documentations of these events differ here. With the H.A.R.M beasts stopping around the battlefield, both the Greks and the Grens have their own accounts on how the story concluded. Continuing with the Grek account of the events, once he realized Dr. Jekyll's inventions were doing nothing to even hurt the beast, General Styler figured there must be something in the ruins of the doctor's lab that could stop the H.A.R.M beast. In an act of bravery, he ran straight towards the beast and into the crumbled walls of the lab. After shifting through the rocks and Grenian corpses, General Styler found charred lab notes detailing what Dr. Jekyll intended H.A.R.M to do originally. He found that not only was it meant to accelerate the healing of the Greks, but also deteriorate the health of the Grens who tried to use it. With this knowledge, General Styler called an assembly of other Greko scientists who were dedicated to helping the Greko war effort, and tasked them with making a reverse version of H.A.R.M, one that would unfortunately accelerate a Gren's healing factor, but hopefully take down the now beastly Dr. Jekyll. The scientists got to work right away, quickly filling the charred holes in Dr. Jekyll's notes and producing just enough anti-H.A.R.M to take down the beast. Loading a shell filled with concoction into one of the auto-artillery tanks, they blasted Dr. Jekyll right between the eyes, where the H.A.R.M virus sat. Immediately, the effects began. The H.A.R.M virus began to writhe and retract its tentacles out from Dr. Jekyll's skin. Simultaneously, Dr. Jekyll began to return to his original size and shape. On the other hand, the Grenian documents claim that General Styler went to talk with their commander, H.A.R.M, and pleaded for the Grenians' help. Commander H.A.R.M, being the fearless and benevolent leader he was, agreed to help the Greks solve their issue. General Styler handed Commander H.A.R.M some of Dr. Jekyll's notes on H.A.R.M that survived the lab's destruction. The Grenian commander was horrified that General Styler would want to make such a thing and nearly turned him away, until he had a brilliant idea. If H.A.R.M was originally intended to heal Greks and kill Grens, what if they engineered it to have the opposite effects? Commander H.A.R.M appointed his best scientists to create the H.A.R.M antidote and ready it for administration. Loading it into a Greko auto-artillery tank, they injected the serum into the beast. The beast let out an awful scream and fell to the ground, motionless. When Commander H.A.R.M and General Styler approached the monstrous Dr. Jekyll's limp body, he looked different. The tentacles that burrowed into his eyes and skin were gone, as well as the strange creature that rested on his face. After the battle with the H.A.R.M beast was over, Commander H.A.R.M headed back to base and called a meeting with the scientists that made the H.A.R.M antidote, and ordered them to mass produce it. They were going to turn the tide of the war in their favor. I do appreciate all of you sticking around to hear this tale. If you just follow me this way, there's many more artifacts and accompanying mysterious stories that I would like to share with you. And later on, if we have time, I will be taking requests on certain artifacts you would like to hear. And there we have it, the H.A.R.M virus, Dr. Jekyll, and the H.A.R.M beast. I gotta admit, I was a little worried about this one because I felt things started looking a little too generic, but I think the overall concept of the doctor that becomes this monstrous hulking beast gives the piece its flair. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments below. And of course, thank you all so much for watching. I love the new character narrator that I have here. I need to perfect Ivan's voice a little bit, but I like where his character could go. So I'm definitely going to do more with him in the future. I hope so. Let me know what other kind of artifact things you would like to see also in the comments below. Tell me everything in the comments below. Tell me your favorite color in the comments below and why. And thank you so much for watching. If you had fun, feel free to like the video. If you hit it in a certain way, you can actually accelerate it into a double-like video. But that requires a lot of research and experimentation that I have not figured out yet. And if you want to hear more original stories from me, I have an entire playlist full of it, but one that I highly recommend is a Photoshop art I did called Cyber Night and the Internal Darkness. So that'll be up top. Playlist of all the other originals will be at the bottom, and that's all I got for you. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm KyngPin Creations, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.